The air in the dimly lit filing cabinet labyrinth was thick with anticipation and the faint scent of old paper mixed with something indefinably electric. Elliot's heart pounded in rhythm with the flickering of the portals, their iridescent hues casting eerie shadows that danced along the narrow corridors, illuminating stacks of paperwork and faded filing labels that seemed to whisper secrets in the silence. Somewhere in the maze, the rogue faction was mobilizing their weaponized sock portals, and the very fabric of reality threatened to unravel. "This is it," Harold hissed, his wild grey hair bristling with static as he clutched a peculiar sock that pulsed with a strange, almost hypnotic energy. "If they succeed, the boundaries between worlds will collapse. We can't let that happen." Mina adjusted her glasses with a sharp snap, her pragmatic gaze scanning the dimness for threats. "We need a plan that doesn't involve running headlong into the chaos. Bureaucratic or not, this office has rules even if they're maddeningly obtuse." Elliot swallowed his nervousness, the ink stains on his fingers suddenly feeling heavier. "So, what? We out-bureaucrat the bureaucrats?" "Precisely," Harold said with a grin. "And maybe throw in a bit of interdimensional mischief." Suddenly, a ripple of discordant light burst forth as a portal near the faction's makeshift command flickered violently, spilling bursts of shimmering energy that warped the air. Elliot caught sight of Ms. Prudence Spindle standing rigid at the center of the storm, her sharp suit billowing as sheets of paperwork swirled like autumn leaves caught in a tempest. Her clipboard, usually the symbol of her ironclad control, trembled in her hands. "Order," she barked, her voice slicing through the chaos. "Contain the breach." But the breach was no longer just a bureaucratic inconvenience. It was a living, breathing anomaly, a chaotic pulse that twisted the very essence of the office. Filing cabinets groaned as they stretched and warped. Corridors bent into impossible geometries, and the hum of fluorescent lights distorted into eerie, otherworldly tones. Elliot darted forward, dodging a sudden cascade of sentient paperclips that clattered and chattered like metallic jesters, their animated forms gleaming with mischievous intent. The absurdity of the moment was not lost on him. The very tools of bureaucracy had become agents of chaos. "Mina, watch out," he shouted as a particularly bold paperclip lunged toward her coffee mug, sending it tumbling in slow motion. "Honestly," Mina muttered, swiping the paperclip away with a flick of her wrist, "I'm starting to think this place is cursed." Harold's fingers danced over the pulsating sock, which seemed to resonate with the ambient chaos. "If we can recalibrate the portal's frequency," he explained breathlessly, "we might collapse the faction's control matrix long enough to sever their hold." Elliot nodded, feeling a surge of determination. "Then, let's do it. For the Bureau and for the lost socks." As they maneuvered through the shifting realities, colors bled beyond the visible spectrum, gravity warped unpredictably, and the hum of the office was replaced by a symphony of surreal sounds, whispers of forgotten paperwork, the soft thud of mismatched socks dropping through unseen dimensions, and the distant meow of Mr. Tiddles, whose mysterious appearances had become an odd but comforting constant. The confrontation reached its crescendo in a vast chamber where portals overlapped, creating a kaleidoscope of impossible vistas. The rogue faction's leader, a stern-faced clerk armed with a weaponized sock, advanced with bureaucratic zealotry fueling his every move. "You don't understand," he sneered. "Control is the only way to prevent chaos." "Control is an illusion," Elliot replied, stepping forward with a wry smile, "especially when it's enforced by paperwork and fear." A chaotic battle ensued, blending slapstick moments, like a rogue stapler firing staples like shurikens with cosmic stakes. as socks transformed into portals and corridors folded in on themselves. Elliot's wit and adaptability proved invaluable, dodging attacks, redirecting chaotic energy, and rallying his allies. In a decisive moment, Harold manipulated the pulsating sock to emit a stabilizing frequency, causing the weaponized portals to flicker and collapse. Mina coordinated the evacuation of displaced paperwork, ensuring no further bureaucratic chaos would spiral out of control. Ms. Spindle, witnessing the unraveling of her faction's plans, lowered her clipboard, a flicker of reluctant respect in her eyes. The battle had been lost, but the war for the Bureau's soul was far from over. As the corridors settled and the portals quieted, Elliot leaned against a filing cabinet, breathless but triumphant. The lines between order and chaos had been crossed and redrawn, leaving the Bureau forever changed. "So," Mina said, sipping her salvaged coffee, "what now?" Elliot smiled, glancing at the peculiar sock still glowing faintly in his hand. "Now, we keep exploring. Because in a place like this, there's always another lost sock, another world, and another absurd adventure waiting just around the corner." And with that, the Bureau of Lost Socks resumed its endless paperwork and strange magic. Its secret safe for another day at least, until the next sock twitched. The fluorescent lights above flickered in their usual half-hearted manner, casting a pallid glow over the sprawling labyrinth of filing cabinets that composed the heart of the Bureau of Lost Socks. The air was thick, with the scent of aged paper, stale coffee, and something faintly metallica, possibly the essence of an overworked copier, or perhaps the lingering residue of interdimensional magic leaking through the countless portals scattered about. Elliot stood at the center of this chaos, his mismatched socks tapping impatiently against the scuffed linoleum floor as he surveyed the scene. Around him, the rogue faction had gathered an odd congregation of senior clerks with furrowed brows and clipped voices, wielding clipboards like weapons. Ms. Prudence Spindle, the faction's de facto leader, stood at the forefront, her sharp suit impeccable even amidst the disorder. Her clipboard was raised like a scepter, and her glare could have frozen molten bureaucracy in its tracks. "Order," she barked, voice echoing off the cavernous walls. "This farce ends now. The sanctity of our filing system must be preserved." Elliot smirked beneath his breath. If only she knew that the sanctity she so fiercely protected was precisely what had to be dismantled. He glanced briefly at his companions. Harold, wild-haired and wildly enthusiastic, was wrestling a handful of animated socks that twisted and curled like mischievous serpents. Mina, ever the pragmatist, stood near an ancient office intercom, issuing calm instructions to scattered allies, her coffee mug steaming in defiance of the brewing storm. And then there was Mr. Tiddles, the office's unofficial feline mascot, weaving confidently through overturned chairs and piles of paperwork, his green eyes gleaming with uncanny intelligence. The battle was not one of swords or guns, but of paperwork, portals, and the absurd rules that governed them all. Elliot took a deep breath and stepped forward, clutching the peculiar sock that had started it, all the one that twitched and glowed faintly, a living key to the chaos they now embraced. "Ms. Spindle," he began, voice steady despite the whirlwind of events. "You cling to rules written for a world that never accounted for the extraordinary. These portals, these socks, they represent possibility, not disorder." "Possibility," Spindle sneered, "is a euphemism for anarchy, and I will not allow this bureau to descend into chaos under your reckless stewardship." With a flourish, she slammed her clipboard onto a nearby desk. The sound echoed, a sharp punctuation to her declaration. But Elliot was ready. With a practiced flick, he activated the sock, and a portal blossomed open, swirling with iridescent colors. From it spilled not destruction, but a flood of paperwork, endless forms and memos, each stamped with bureaucratic seals from dimensions unknown. "You see," Elliot said, voice rising over the din, "bureaucracy is chaos's dance partner. Without one, the other has no rhythm." Harold seized the moment, tossing a particularly unruly sock that morphed mid-air into a flurry of luminescent ribbons, tangling the faction's attempts at order in a literal web of red tape. Mina, ever resourceful, keyed a series of commands into the intercom, summoning reinforcements from distant corners of the office. Clerk number 42 appeared, clipboard clutched tightly, eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and excitement. "Rule 47B, Section 12, he intoned robotically, permits the use of dimensional anomalies in emergency bureaucratic procedures." "Exactly," Elliot grinned. "Let's make this an emergency worth remembering." The battle unfolded as a surreal ballet of paperwork storms, shifting portals, and witty repartee. Ms. Spindle attempted to regain control, brandishing her clipboard like a shield. But the very rules she revered turned against her as Elliot cited obscure clauses and loopholes with gleeful precision. Each attempt to impose order only opened new cracks where chaos could seep through. Somewhere in the melee, Mr. Tiddles darted past, his soft paws silent against the floor as he led Elliot to a neglected filing cabinet, its door slightly ajar. Inside lay the key evidence, the faction's own plans, carelessly filed under miscellaneous. Elliot snatched the documents, waving them triumphantly. "It's over," he declared. "Your plans have been archived and, thus neutralized." A collective groan rose from the faction as their schemes unraveled like ill-fitted socks. Ms. Spindle's glare faltered, her clipboard lowered in reluctant concession. Elliot stepped back, heart pounding with exhilaration. The bureau was still a mess, a beautiful, absurd mess, but for the first time in a long while, it felt alive with possibility rather than stifled by stagnation. "Balance," he whispered to himself, glancing once more at the glowing sock in his hand. "That's what we need. A balance between order and chaos, rules and whimsy." As the portals flickered and faded, the paperwork settled into neat piles, and the office hummed with a renewed energy. Elliot's journey was far from over, but the absurd battle had been won, and somewhere in the depths of the bureau, the socks waited ready to open new doors, new worlds, and new stories. The battle was absurd, the stakes were cosmic, and the Bureau of Lost Socks would never be the same again. But the question lingered, teasing at the edges of Elliot's mind. How does one govern chaos without becoming its prisoner? The answer, like a missing sock, was elusive, but the adventure, as always, was worth the chase. The aftermath of the conflict settled over the Bureau of Lost Socks like a thick fog, settling into every crevice and cranny of the labyrinthine office. Filing cabinets stood slightly ajar, their doors swinging like tired eyelids after a restless night. Papers lay scattered across desks and floors, some fluttering gently from the soft hum of the flickering fluorescent lights, others stubbornly clinging to their places, as if refusing to acknowledge the chaos that had just transpired. The once pristine monotony of the bureaucracy was now a patchwork of disorder and hesitant hope. Elliot leaned heavily against the doorframe of the main filing room, his mismatched socks peeking out from under his rumpled trousers. His ink-stained fingers twitched as he absent-mindedly traced invisible patterns on the chipped wooden surface. Around him, the sounds of the office awakening from its shocked stupor echoed, the rustling of papers being gathered, the low murmur of clerks exchanging tentative words, the occasional clatter of a dropped stapler. It was as if the bureau itself was breathing, trying to steady its pulse after being jolted awake. "Well," Elliot muttered, to no one in particular, "if this isn't the strangest Monday I've ever seen." Harold appeared beside him, his wild grey hair even more disheveled than usual, a crooked smile tugging at his lips. "Strange Mondays are the bureau's specialty," he replied, eyes twinkling despite the exhaustion etched into his face. "But I dare say this one takes the cake." They moved together through the office, careful not to step on the piles of socks that still littered the corridors, some clean, others mangled and forlorn. Mina was already at her desk, her neat bun slightly loosened from stress, glasses perched precariously on her nose as she shuffled through a mountainous stack of reports and forms. Her ever-present coffee mug steamed gently, a small island of normalcy amid the chaos. "We need to get this place sorted," Mina said without looking up, her tone pragmatic but laced with fatigue. "The higher-ups will want reports, explanations, and assurances. And frankly, I'm not sure we have any of those right now." Elliot nodded. "The sock portals. They're not going anywhere. The Bureau has to accept that. But how do we keep order without crushing the magic that's been unleashed?" Mina sighed, rubbing her temples. "Maybe by accepting that some things can't be controlled." Their conversation was interrupted by the sharp footsteps of Ms. Prudence Spindle, clipboard in hand, slicing through the room like a blade of bureaucratic resolve. Her trademark sharp suit seemed almost out of place in the disheveled setting, and her disapproving glare scanned the room with practiced precision. "This state is unacceptable," she intoned, her voice cold but tinged with a reluctant undercurrent of concern. "Order must be restored before the next audit." Elliot exchanged a glance with Harold and Mina, sensing the familiar rigidity that had once been their opposition, now tempered by a grudging respect born from shared ordeal. "Ms. Spindle," Elliot began cautiously, "perhaps there's value in rethinking what order means around here. The portals have changed everything." Her eyes narrowed, but she said nothing, merely tapping her clipboard as if weighing his words against some unseen scale. Across the room, Mr. Tiddles, the office cat, settled atop a mound of lost socks, his green eyes half closed in contentment. His purring was a soothing cadence amid the unsettled atmosphere, a quiet reminder that some things remained unchanged even in the face of cosmic upheaval. As the day wore on, the clerks of the Bureau began the slow, arduous process of rebuilding. Teams formed to devise new filing protocols that accounted for the peculiarities of sock portals, and debates sparked over how much freedom the portals could be allowed without jeopardizing the fabric of reality, or the sanity of the office staff. Elliot found himself at the center of these discussions, his earlier indecision replaced by a measured confidence. The journey from curious intern to reluctant hero had left its mark, and now he carried the weight of responsibility with a wry smile and a twinkle of whimsy. Late in the afternoon, as shadows lengthened and the hum of fluorescent lights softened, Elliot stood by a window overlooking the endless rows of filing cabinets and the tangled maze that was the Bureau. Somewhere within that maze lay the gateways to countless worlds, each as bizarre and capricious as the socks that opened them. "Balance," Elliot whispered to himself, "between chaos and order, between the mundane and the magical. That's the real task ahead." And with that, the Bureau of Lost Socks began a new chapter, one where absurdity and bureaucracy danced a delicate waltz, and where even the smallest, most overlooked sock could hold the key to worlds beyond imagining. But as the lights flickered once more and the office cat stretched languidly atop his sock throne, a faint glow pulsed from a lone sock half hidden beneath a desk, as if reminding Elliot that the story was far from over. "So, Elliot said with a grin. "What do you say we see where this one leads?" The room seemed to hold its breath, and somewhere deep within the bureau, a portal shimmered faintly, waiting. The endless corridors of the Bureau of Lost Socks had never seemed so quiet. The usual cacophony of clacking keyboards, rustling papers, and the occasional frustrated sigh had softened to a gentle murmur, as if the building itself was taking a breath. In this rare lull, Elliot found himself seated cross-legged on the cold linoleum floor of a seldom-used filing alcove, a small circle of odd socks forming an eccentric perimeter around him. Each sock, in its own way, seemed to vibrate faintly with a secret energy, a pulse just beyond the grasp of ordinary perception. Harold sat nearby, his wild grey hair tousled as usual, eyes alight with the kind of fervor that only a true enthusiast could muster. "You see," he began, waving a hand toward a particularly garish argyle sock, "these little fabric gateways are more than just lost laundry. They're stories waiting to be told, worlds waiting to be explored. And we've only scratched the surface." Elliot's fingers idly traced the frayed edge of a blue sock, the fabric surprisingly warm beneath his touch. "It's strange," he mused, "how something so mundane can hold such magic. It's like finding a secret in plain sight, hidden beneath a veil of bureaucracy and paperwork." Harold chuckled, a sound like dry leaves rustling. "Bureaucracy is just a way to cage the chaos, my boy. But chaos has a way of slipping through the cracks. These socks are proof." From her usual post by the filing cabinets, Mina appeared, coffee mug in hand, her neat bun slightly askew from the day's stress. She leaned against a cabinet, arms crossed, her sharp eyes fixed on Elliot. "I never thought I'd say this," she admitted with a half smile, "but after everything we've seen, maybe there really is something to your sock theories." Elliot looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "You believe it?" "I believe there's more to this place than endless paperwork and lost socks," Mina replied, her tone pragmatic but tinged with newfound wonder. "I don't know about all the dimensions and portals, but I believe in the magic of mystery." A soft meow broke the conversation as Mr. Tiddles, the scruffy grey tabby who had become the Bureau's unofficial mascot, padded silently into the circle. He paused beside a sock pulsing with a gentle, otherworldly light. Elliot crouched, his heart quickening as he reached out. The sock shimmered beneath his fingertips, a gateway shimmering quietly in the dim light. The hum of fluorescent bulbs overhead mingled with the faint crackle of otherworldly energy, creating an atmosphere thick with possibility. "It's still here," Elliot whispered, awestruck. "The magic." Harold nodded solemnly. "And it's up to us to keep it alive. To guard the secret, to explore it responsibly." The three of them sat together in the glow, the absurdity of their surroundings, the endless files, the buzzing office lights, the ever-present hum of bureaucracy fading into the background. What mattered was the shared understanding, the bond forged in the quiet spaces between paperwork and portals. As the afternoon waned, Elliot found himself drawn to the rain-speckled window overlooking the sprawling city. The skies were a muted grey, the streets glistening with recent showers. But to Elliot, the world beyond seemed alive with endless potential. He smiled, a mischievous curl tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Who would have thought," he said softly, "that a lost sock could hold so much meaning?" Mina joined him at the window, sipping her coffee. "Maybe it's not just about lost socks," she said thoughtfully. "Maybe it's about all the little things we overlook. The small mysteries that keep life interesting." Elliot nodded, his gaze drifting back to the labyrinthine office behind them. The Bureau of Lost Socks would always be a place of endless paperwork and strange magic. But now, it was also a sanctuary for secrets and stories, a testament to the whimsical possibilities hidden in the most ordinary corners of existence. And as the rain tapped a gentle rhythm against the glass, Elliot knew that their journey was far from over. The socks still whispered their secrets, the portals still beckoned, and somewhere in the stacks of forgotten laundry, the next adventure awaited. With a final glance at the softly glowing sock in his hand, Elliot turned back to the heart of the bureau, ready to face whatever absurdity and wonder the next day might bring. The secret of the lost socks was safe for now, but like all good secrets, it was waiting to be discovered again by those curious enough to look beyond the mundane. And Elliot was nothing if not curious. The faint hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in Ms. Prudence Spindle's office, casting a sterile glow over the stacks of meticulously organized files that climbed toward the ceiling like silent sentinels guarding secrets. For once, the usual sharpness in Spindle's eyes was muted, replaced by a softness that matched the dimness of the room. She sat motionless at her desk, fingers loosely gripping a worn photograph that had clearly seen better days. The image revealed a younger Prudence, standing beside a chaotic spillage of socks and strange devices, an incident from years ago that had nearly unraveled a minor portal within the bureau. Back then, she had been brimming with ambition and a rigid determination to control every aspect of the bureau's operations. But the memory now felt like a ghost, haunting the edges of her mind with whispers of failure and imperfection. A sudden knock at the door startled her. "Come in," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. Elliot entered cautiously, his usual disheveled appearance slightly subdued by the weight of the conversation he intended to have. The ink stains on his fingers seemed to smudge his nervousness, but his eyes were steady. Mina followed behind, clutching her ever-present coffee mug, her pragmatic gaze flickering between the two. "Ms. Spindle," Elliot began, "we've all seen how much strain the recent events have put on everyone here. But I think there's a way to balance things between order and the chaos the sock portals bring." For a moment, Prudence regarded him silently. Then she sighed, a sound heavy with years of suppressed frustration. "You don't know how long I've fought to keep this place from falling apart," she said quietly. "Every rule, every procedure, it's all I have to hold back the tide. But sometimes I wonder if the tide is stronger than me." Mina stepped forward, her tone softer than usual. "You don't have to bear it alone. We're all part of this bureau, and maybe it's time to admit that some things are beyond control." Harold shuffled in, his wild grey hair looking even more untamed in the dim light. "Chaos isn't the enemy," he said with a crooked smile. "It's just a different kind of order we haven't learned to understand yet." The room fell into a contemplative silence, broken only by the ticking of an ancient clock on the wall. Prudence looked around at the faces before her, the hopeful intern, the steadfast colleague, the eccentric mentor, and felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself in a long time: hope. Suddenly, the lights flickered and dimmed, shadows stretching along the walls like spectral fingers. For a brief moment, the bureau itself seemed to embody the delicate dance between light and dark, order and chaos. Prudence's hand tightened around the photograph before she set it down gently. "Perhaps," she whispered, "it's time to stop fighting the tide and start learning to swim with it." Elliot smiled, a spark of their shared journey reflected in his eyes. "Then let's find a new way together." As the dim office lights brightened once more, a subtle shift rippled through the bureau. The rigid lines of bureaucracy, long thought unbreakable, now seemed just a little more flexible. The dance between absurdity and order had found a new rhythm, and the story of lost socks and those who dared to unlock their secrets was far from over. And with that, the chapter closed on Ms. Spindle's lament, not as an end, but as a beginning. The office, a place of endless paperwork and whispered secrets, had revealed one of its most guarded truths. Beneath the layers of rules and reprimands, there was a human heart grappling with the impossible. The Bureau of Lost Socks was no longer simply a battleground between control and chaos. It was a living, breathing paradox, much like the socks it contained. The journey ahead promised more absurdities, more whimsy, and more moments that defied logic. But for now, the quiet understanding between Elliot and Ms. Spindle marked a fragile piece of pause in the relentless hum of bureaucracy that allowed for a glimpse of something magical, something new. And somewhere in the distance, Mr. Tiddles the cat watched with inscrutable eyes, as if knowing that the next chapter of the Bureau's story was already unfolding, one lost sock at a time. Elliot stood before the softly pulsing gateway, a sock unlike any other in his hands. Its fabric shimmered faintly, colors rippling like oil on water, beckoning him forward with the promise of secrets yet uncovered. The office around him buzzed with routine, the hum of printers and the rustle of papers a familiar background soundtrack to his days. Yet here, at this threshold, the monotony fractured, revealing a kaleidoscope of possibility. He adjusted the cuff of his shirt, fingers ink-stained from endless forms and notes, and glanced down at his own mismatched socks, one striped blue and grey, the other a solid scarlet. They were his quiet rebellion against the stifling sameness of the Bureau, a small symbol of the chaos he'd come to accept and now champion. "Ready," Harold's voice cracked through the stillness, wild grey hair askew, spectacles perched precariously on his nose. Beside him, Mina sipped her ever-present coffee, eyes sharp and wary but supportive. Mr. Tiddles, the inscrutable office cat, wound around Elliot's legs, tail flicking lazily. Elliot nodded. "Let's see what's on the other side." Together, they stepped through the portal, the world dissolving into a swirl of colors and sounds. When the haze cleared, they found themselves in a dimension that defied earthly logic, a landscape of impossible geometry, where gravity seemed optional and whimsy reigned. Trees with leaves like fluttering bookmarks whispered secrets, and creatures with too many eyes blinked in curious patterns. Elliot's heart raced. This was why he had endured the tedious paperwork, the endless rules, the sneers of Ms. Spindle. This was the magic beneath the mundane, the absurdity lurking in the lost and forgotten. Harold fumbled with his notebook, eager to capture details, but distracted by a small, hopping creature that seemed to regard him with amusement. Mina's gaze was vigilant, cataloguing exits and potential hazards with pragmatic efficiency. "Remember," Elliot said, his voice steady despite the wonder, "we're explorers, but we're also responsible. We can't let curiosity turn into chaos." The journey through this bizarre realm was filled with moments of laughter, surprise, and careful navigation. They gathered samples, took notes, and shared stories, each step reinforcing their bond and deepening their understanding of the delicate balance they must maintain. When they returned, the office felt different. The usual drone of clerks filing socks was punctuated by whispers of Elliot's expedition. Eyes that once dismissed him now followed his every move with cautious interest. Some colleagues dared to smile, others exchanged speculative glances, and a few even approached with tentative questions. Elliot took to the center of the main room, scattering his notes and sketches across a cleared desk. His voice carried through the space as he recounted their journey, painting vivid images of the strange dimension and the lessons learned. "The Bureau isn't just a repository for lost socks," he declared. "It's a gateway to countless worlds, each with its own rules and wonders. Our job isn't to suppress the chaos, but to understand it, to steward it with care." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Change was in the air. From the back of the room, Miss Prudence Spindle observed quietly, clipboard clasped tightly in her hands. Her sharp gaze softened imperceptibly as she listened, the rigid lines of her face betraying a flicker of conflicted respect. Perhaps there was space for something new, even within the strict order she had spent her career defending. Elliot caught her eye and offered a small, hopeful smile. The journey ahead would be uncertain, fraught with absurdity and challenge, but he was no longer just the intern overwhelmed by the Bureau's endless paperwork. He was an explorer, a guardian of the strange and wonderful, and this was only the beginning. As the office settled into an uneasy but promising calm, Elliot's thoughts turned to the next portal, the next sock, the next adventure waiting just beyond the veil of the ordinary. Somewhere in the labyrinth of lost things, magic shimmered quietly, waiting to be found again. With a purposeful step, he moved toward the filing cabinets, ready to lead the Bureau into a future where whimsy and order danced in balance, where the absurd was embraced rather than feared. The Bureau of Lost Socks would never be the same, and neither would he. The hum of the fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, an almost constant soundtrack to the endless shuffle of paper and the muted tapping of keyboards. The Bureau of Lost Socks, as always, was a place where the mundane and the extraordinary rubbed shoulders in a dance that only the most attuned could appreciate. At the heart of this curious institution stood Elliot, the once overwhelmed intern who had grown into something much more, a reluctant guardian of secrets, a bridge between worlds, both bureaucratic and cosmic. It was late afternoon, and the fading sun cast long, dusty beams through the slatted blinds, turning the office into a lattice of light and shadow. Elliot held in his hand a single sock, no longer just a lost piece of fabric, but a glowing gateway to endless possibilities. The sock pulsed faintly, its colors shifting subtly like the surface of a calm sea touched by a breeze. Around him, the office was alive with quiet activity. Clerks filing, phones ringing, and the occasional meow of Mr. Tiddles weaving through the legs of desks and chairs. Elliot paused before the towering filing cabinets that stretched to the ceiling, their drawers neatly labeled with codes only decipherable to the initiated. This was the labyrinthine heart of the Bureau, a place where every lost sock was catalogued, its origins traced, and its potential contained. But containment was no longer the goal. Thanks to months of exploration, countless adventures through portals, and a few near catastrophes, the Bureau was evolving. Across the room, Miss Prudence Spindle watched with a clipboard clutched tightly in her hands. Her sharp suit was as immaculate as ever, and her glare as piercing. But today there was something differenter, faint hesitation behind her eyes, a crack in the armor of rigid control. Elliot caught her glance and smiled, a small gesture of peace forged through shared trials. "Elliot," she called, her voice carrying the crisp authority that had once been a source of dread. "Your proposal for the new filing system." He stepped forward, holding up a tablet displaying intricate diagrams and flowcharts interwoven with notes about portal behavior and sock dimensions. "It's a hybrid system. It respects the need for order but allows for the unpredictability of the portals. We can't cage magic with paperwork alone, but we can guide it." Miss Spindle studied the screen, her lips pressing into a thin line. The office around them seemed to hold its breath. After a long moment, she nodded, just slightly. "Very well, we shall proceed." A murmur of surprise passed through the nearby clerks, and for a fleeting second, the Bureau felt less like a fortress of tedium and more like a cradle of possibility. Meanwhile, Harold shuffled toward the coffee machine, a wild grin on his face and a stray thread dangling from his mismatched jacket. Mina followed, her usual skeptical expression softened by a rare smile. Mr. Tiddles, the unofficial office mascot, darted between their feet, his bell tinkling merrily. "You know," Harold said, pouring a generous splash of cream into his cup, "I never thought I'd see the day when bureaucracy and cosmic chaos found common ground." Mina chuckled, adjusting her glasses. "Only here, Harold. Only here." Their laughter mingled with the gentle clatter of mugs and the rustle of papers, a small island of warmth amid the endless paperwork. Back at his desk, Elliot glanced once more at the glowing sock. It beckoned him, a silent invitation to step beyond the boundaries of the known. He took a deep breath, feeling the familiar thrill of the unknown coursing through him. The bureau was his home now, a place where the absurd and the orderly danced in tandem, where lost things found purpose, and where every sock held a story waiting to be told. With a final glance around the office, a place forever caught between chaos and control, Elliot slipped the sock onto his hand. The air shimmered, a soft hum rising as the portal flickered to life. He stepped forward, feeling the fabric of reality ripple and fold, the colors of the alternate dimension spilling into the drab gray of the office. As the mundane world faded behind him, Elliot smiled, ready to explore new realms, to uncover new mysteries, and to carry the bureau's secret into the infinite tapestry of existence. And somewhere, deep within the labyrinth of filing cabinets, the socks twitched and shimmered, alive with possibility. The Bureau of Lost Socks remained, as always, a place of endless paperwork, peculiar magic, and now, a fragile but beautiful balance between order and whimsy. But the adventure, as Elliot knew, was far from over. The soft clatter of footsteps echoed faintly in the corridors as the office began to wind down for the day. Yet, in the quiet corners, whispers of new ideas and possibilities stirred. Elliot's journey had transformed not just himself, but the very soul of the Bureau. In this place where the lost were found and the forgotten remembered, the impossible had become routine, and the routine a canvas for the extraordinary. And as long as there were socks to lose and worlds to discover, the Bureau would endure chaotic, bureaucratic, and wonderfully absurd. The end, or rather a new beginning.